Okay. Actually, hang on 2 seconds. I was just wondering whether no, it's I think it's now recorded in my computer, so I'll have to post it in the Facebook group now. So sorry about that. I was thinking I could just give you a link to rewatch.
Oh,
So, principles and practices. If you were describing or explaining to somebody who didn't know anything about our industry what it was all about, you would be wanting to do it in a very a meaningful way that they would understand. You wouldn't want to be using long technical words. You wouldn't want to be worried too much about sentence construction, grammar, referencing, all of those sorts of things. It's literally just about the communication between you and somebody that you were talking about, whether that's your partner, your friend, your child, your mum, your dad, or whatever. So if we start with thinking about what our industry is all about, and that is complementary therapies. What does complementary therapies mean? It means things that we can do that complement any form of wellness procedure. So as an example, my mum's in hospital at the moment with ridiculously high blood pressure, and they cannot work out why she's got ridiculously high blood pressure. She is being given all sorts of different concoctions to try and bring down her blood pressure. And of course, all of those medicines are going to go through her liver. So a complementary medicine would be something like herbalism, which would allow the herbalist to consult with my mum and look at all of the stuff that's going through her body and recommend that she took some, probably milk thistle is one of the complementary herbs that would support the liver while the medical industry are doing their thing. So that's what complementary therapy is about. It's about stuff that you can do to help the body whilst other thing is going on. Alternative medicine, however, is where the medicine or the technique is given as an alternative. That's why it's called alternative medicine. And there aren't many alternative medicines. So there's physiotherapy. So if you go to a GP might say, well, rather than give you some painkillers, I'm going to send you to a physiotherapist, and a physiotherapist is going to give you some exercises to do to relieve the pain in your lower back, and hopefully you'll be cured from that. So physiotherapy is an alternative medicine. So is chiropractic, osteopathy, and also Chinese medicine is actually an alternative therapy. So it's not recognized as such in the Western world. But if you go to Asia, you don't get given a drug as first point of call. You get given herbs, medicines, and they check your tongue, they check your well-being, your breath, your eyes, all of those things, and they would then give you alternatives to medicine. So that's kind of where complementary therapy sits and alternative medicine sits. So then you've got to think, well, anybody could do anything, couldn't they? Anybody could, go into the garden and pick some herbs and be a herbalist. And so where is the protection for the public? Well, actually, let's backtrack from that for a little bit, because in about I think it's 2004, somewhere around there, Prince Charles kicked off a debate in Parliament that said, we as the nation need to start looking after ourselves, our own health. And there are all these things out there that are available. And he wanted the National Health Service to start looking at them as complementary things that fund holding practices would allow funding to be given as an alternative. And for many, many years, the GP's purse strings have actually allowed the funding regime to offer all sorts of complementary therapies. And my cousin, who is a pharmacist, she sat on a board for many years that approved GP's request for money for alternative and complementary therapies. So this has been going on for a very, very long time. It's a thing. It just depends on whether the fund holders and the practice managers believe in it, value it, and want to spend their money on that side of it. Now, I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of the pharmaceutical companies and their hold on the National Health Service and purse strings and all the rest of it. However, it's a thing. And it's something just to be mindful about, that, you know, there are very real reasons why all of these things are not given as an alternative. And it comes down to clinical trials, because the health service have to know that what they are prescribing for the patient is safe and effective and in the value of the funding. So the only way that somebody who's got this pot of money will approve medication or treatment is if they know that it is safe to use. How do they know it's safe to use? Because there are clinical trials. Some things have clinical trials and some things don't have clinical trials. Just because there is no clinical trial done on something does not mean it doesn't work. It just means nobody has proved it. So it's a little bit like you can be the best driver in the world, but unless you've taken your driving test and have that piece of paper to say that somebody has assessed your driving skills, nobody knows. Simple as that. Okay. So there was in, I think it was 2004, correct me if I'm wrong, anybody that's done their research recently, there was an integrated health bill that went through Houses of Parliament, which categorised all of these different things that are out there. So we have an alternative therapy, and then we have complementary therapies. We have a whole list of sectors which are governed by legislation. So to be on that list, you have to, to practice, you have to be on the list. So we're talking about doctors, midwives, nurses, dentists, physiotherapists. There's a whole list. There's about 13 different categories of where, if you want to practice in the medical industry, you have to have a license to practice, you have to be on a register, you have to update your skills every year, you have to have that piece of paper, and without it you can't work. So Shauna's on that list, aren't you, Shauna? You can put a comment in the chat there somewhere. And has to pay to be on that list and upgrade insurance and all the rest of it. Coming down from that, there is then a voluntary register, and that voluntary register is, as we said, voluntary. It is hosted by the Professional Standards Authority. So there are links on the TLR to the Professional Standards Authority website that you can see not only the list of 13 or 10 national registers, but you can also see the voluntary ones. And the voluntary register is something that you need to know about. You need to know why it's there to start with. So can anybody hazard a guess why a voluntary register was set up? Who's it to protect? Any idea off the top of your head?
The general public?
Absolutely. Because the question is, how does anybody know whether you are qualified or not when there is no legislation for you to be qualified? It's a good question, isn't it? Well, one option is that you are on a voluntary register. And in order to be on that voluntary register, you have to prove that you've got the right qualifications, that you hold insurance, and that you have completed continued professional development each year. So if you're on the register, the public can look you up and go, they're on the register, they must be all right. It also gives a body the authority to be able to strike you off, so you can be removed from that voluntary register. So if the general public knew about it and valued it, it would be an amazing thing. Unfortunately, the general public don't know about it and they don't necessarily value it. So it has got a bit of a question mark. So why would anybody want to be on there? Well, the main answer Well, there's two. Either because you want to prove to yourself and everybody else that you've got those letters after your name and you're on the register. And for some people, that's as simple as it is. It's there, so I want it. Secondly, it could be because the people that you are working with want you to have it. So if you're working maybe for a hospice or a hospital, you're doing work with healthcare professionals, they might very well say, in order to do the work that you're doing, in order for us to employ you, we want you to be on that voluntary register. So it might be something that you do for your work. Now, one of the ways that you can get onto that voluntary register is apply directly. And if you do that and apply directly, you pay one price because they do the background checks on you. The other way is to go via what's called a verifying organisation, which is the next tier down, which are the professional associations. So within our industry, there are dozens of professional associations. Now, those associations are things like the Association of Reflexologists, which hopefully you all know about, but they are also the Federation of Holistic Therapists, the General Association of Complementary Therapists and something or other, and then there's many, many, many more. So some of them are what we call verifying organisations, which means if you want to join the professional register, which by the way is acronymed the CNHC, and that was the first one that was set up by Parliament as a voluntary register. There were then, up until quite recently, about 3 others. They've disappeared. They've decided that they no longer want to be part of the Professional Standards Authority. I think it's probably the cost of actually being linked to them is too great. They have to jump through too many hoops. And actually, the Professional Standards Authority doesn't cover enough of the skills sector. So something like Reiki, for instance. No, not Reiki. That one is covered. I don't know. I'm going to say no, I can't off the top of my head, otherwise I'll give you false information. But you can probably do that bit of research yourself. Yoga, there we go, yoga. Yoga's not covered. So if you are a yoga practitioner wanting to add reflexology, you could be on there for the reflexology, but not for the yoga. So you might find that actually from an award, a professional association's point of view, they don't feel it supports their members enough because a lot of their members have skills that they can't join the register with. So there'd be a bit of a them and an us type of scenario. So that, is a very valid reason. And that was the reason that the FHT gave for pulling out of being on the membership. And what they've now done, the FHT, Federation of Holistic Therapists, which is one of the biggest professional associations, they've actually created their own register, which obviously would have all of the different disciplines that they support, and they want to support all of the disciplines because in order to be a member you have to pay, and so they want that annual membership each year. They want to grow their membership and support their members because that's what they are about. Any questions so far on what I've just said? So if you were writing that up as a sort of a piece in your report, you might start it with, I find it really strange that as a practicing reflexologist or complementary therapist, you actually don't have to have a license. But when I looked deeper into it, I could actually see why. It's so complicated. Our industry is so vast. There are so many different skills and lots of things that are coming into our arena on a very regular basis. So what we do have, and then list it. So what we do have is we have the Professional Standards Authority that look after these groups of people. And you can, or I could, so it's in the first person, I could, if I wanted to, become a member of this association that has been set up to protect the public, and I could go on there. I've got 2 options. I can either join directly with them and pay this amount, or I could go via one of the verifying organisations and become a member of that first, which means then I would pay less for the privilege. And then from there you could say, well, I can see the benefit to the public, to me. However, that's not something that I think that I would want to do, because so you're putting in your personal perspective about what you think, and that's going to be different. There's no right or wrong. Shauna might, because she's in the health service at the moment, she might have a very different viewpoint to somebody that's already involved with yoga and gong baths and breathing techniques and other stuff that she wouldn't be able to join the register with anyway. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Then you move on to, however, what there are to support me as a practitioner is a professional association, and there are lots of them, and you can list half a dozen if you want to. You could, if you want to, look at 2 or 3 and compare them as to what is the differences. What I wouldn't want you to do is to go onto their website and just copy and paste their sales spiel, because it's all the same. They all say the same thing. They all say that they protect the industry, they offer support to members, they offer a register so that actually the public can check out to see the members. Some offer a little map with a pin so that people can check where they are and a member. Some offer a badge, some offer a window sticker. They nearly all offer a membership magazine of discounts to other places. So there's not any value in just copy and pasting that they all do the same thing. What would be more beneficial is for you to identify that one has insurance included and one doesn't, that one you can only join if you've done their training. So International Federation of Reflexologists, as an example, you can only join them if you've done their training. AOR will accept you if you've got a regulated qualification, the same as FHT. So then it's this difference between a regulated qualification or an accreditation. So that would be useful to identify, so that the differences. So that if you came across somebody that was wasn't a member of AOR or the FHT, you might have some idea of why that might be. Maybe it's because they can't, because they don't hold the right qualifications. So you're getting a little bit savvy about qualifications, about where people sit, and not wanting to encourage, I don't know what the right word is, snobbishness, professional snobbishness, because actually just because somebody has done an accredited training doesn't mean to say they don't have the skills, knowledge and behaviours, but sometimes it does. And some people that have done training where they can only join this association, it's because they've done some online work. They've not done any practical. Nobody's actually assessed their skills. Well, actually, yeah, they can't join us because they haven't proved that they've got that skills, knowledge and behaviour. So it is important to have that differentiation in there. So professional associations are there to bridge the gap between the client, you, and the legislation and the support. And some of the associations were incredibly supportive during COVID, and some of them not so. Some of them gave templates for COVID risk assessments to add to your risk assessments. Some of them kind of just disappeared and hid and hoped that people wouldn't ask too many difficult questions. Some of them had a lot of online CPD training and kept people engaged, and really championed our industry and worked with councils to push forward our case in Parliament. So there are these other kind of groups of people called the councils, and councils really work for the benefit of the whole industry. So they're not sector specific. They're not so they're not just yoga, they're not just reflexology, they're not just massage. They are the whole industry, and we have 3 main ones. They all do have the word beauty in them, which does make a lot of complementary therapists kind of go ooh. So we've got the British Beauty Council, but they actually look after the whole sector. And we then have the Federation of Hair and Beauty Professionals, I think. And again, they look after the whole sector. So they look after everything from things like environmental legislation. So they encourage manufacturers and the cosmetic regulations to be more mindful on environmental things. But they also look after the spa industry, and they have been working really hard to champion mental health and also trying to re-educate employers to not work our massage therapists into the ground by making them do 10 massages so the whole sector, it's the spa and wellness sector. And what's come out of a lot of work that the councils have done is we now have within our regulatory framework for qualifications, we have an NVQ in spa and wellness, which means that somebody going into our sector can actually get a job working in a spa and do an NVQ to create for themselves a career path for life, which would include eventually management level stuff as well. But they would come in maybe as a sort of a 17, 18-year-old and learn Indian head massage, reception, selling skills, so that when you go there as a guest into a spa, you had a young person that was going through their complementary and wellness journey, that understood mindfulness, that was able to consult with somebody who had a cancer diagnosis and be able to treatment plan appropriately. So the whole industry is going in the right way. So just because you are just at the moment doing just reflexology doesn't mean to say that all of these things feed into your career and your world. And it's really important that you understand the big picture of our industry and where it fits. And it's quite fascinating, really, but you're not going to know it all immediately. So it's just little bits on the outside and having an awareness of what's happening in our industry. We also have an all-party parliamentary group. So this is a group of people in Westminster that talk about things that are relevant to our industry. And at the moment, they're particularly interested in the aesthetic side of things. They have been very interested in things like sunbeds and protection for people in sunbeds. They're also looking at the role of protecting the workforce who are suffering with menopausal conditions. And these are all things that actually feed into our world working as a complementary therapist, and really important for us to be aware of, because they affect our clients and they affect us and they affect our industry as a whole. So that's something that councils have been really pushing for the all-party parliamentary force in Parliament to look at our industry. So it's like it's another level. It's way over there, and we don't really have a lot of direction. But actually, they have a YouTube channel and they record all of their meetings, and it's fascinating what they talk about. And this is all of the people that make up the council in Parliament. So there's that kind of understanding of what goes on in our industry. And, an awful lot of reflexologists would kind of think, wow, I had no idea that goes on. It's such a big thing. I'm just my person here doing my feet, and there's all of this other stuff in the sector that we can feed into. But we might find ourselves working in a hospice. We might find ourselves working with patients who have an end-of-life diagnosis. We might work with people on a voluntary basis, actually in hospices or for the National Health Service, actually doing a lot of really great work. So it is important that we have a kind of an understanding of the industry. And so having an idea of that there is this top level thing, which is the government saying there is the option to be licensed, right the way down to an association that looks after you and how you can navigate your way through this industry, support you with your business, support you with understanding the legislation, making sure that you've got the right insurances as well is really important for a professional association. there is actually enough legislation, so pieces of law, that you as a professional, so charging money for what you do is the definition of a professional. There's enough legislation in place that actually we don't need licensing. So the top level is insurance. It's a legal responsibility that you have public liability insurance to practice. Now that doesn't matter whether you are working on a beach. That'd be nice, wouldn't it? In a hotel room, from your own home, from the client's home, in a shopping mall, doesn't matter where you work. If you are charging time for money, or you are actually just engaged in work, you have to have public liability insurance. So that's a little bit like your third party insurance to drive on the road. And if you don't have it, you can be prosecuted. Okay, so that's the first thing. So how do you get public liability? You have to show that you have some form of training and you have a qualification. So an insurance company will do a risk assessment based on what you're actually going to do, how you're going to do it, and make a judgment whether they will cover you for insurance. Leading on from there is something called professional indemnity insurance, and this is voluntary, so you do not have to be insured to practice. And that professional indemnity covers you for anything that you might do to the client that might harm them. Now, with reflexology, there's virtually nothing that you can do other than break their toe. There is a risk that the product you might use on their skin might cause an allergic reaction. There is a risk that you might give inaccurate information, which is why we don't give information, we don't diagnose. We signpost, and that's something that is linked into our professional practice. Signposting is really important, which is why one of the tasks is about looking at all of the other different alternative therapies and complementary therapies that there are, and making sure that you can signpost effectively. So I'll come back to that in a moment, because this is the one that, who said that they'd done 1,000 words? Danielle, you'd done 1,000 words and you weren't sure whether it was too much. So hold that thought, I'll come back to that. But with the insurance, public liability, professional indemnity, potentially you need. And then there are some local bylaws. So there is another piece of legislation which is called Miscellaneous Provisions Act 1982, if you want the year. And this was a piece of legislation that is out there that basically says local authorities can make up their own rules with regard to licensing. So there are some areas of the country that have licensing requirements. So this is where you actually have to apply to have a license to practice, and the premises that you are working in has to have a license to be worked in. Now, this was created to try and remove the opportunities for illegal sexual practices, where people would be advertising that they were doing massage services where actually it was prostitution, which, as you probably know, is still illegal. So therefore it was brought in for that. And the majority of places or local authorities in the UK have said, if you are a member of the AOR or the FHT or one of the other verifying organisations, or on the licence for CNHC, on the list for CNHC, you are exempt. Okay, so they've nearly all said that, with the exception of Essex and Herefordshire, or Hertfordshire, can't remember which, Herefordshire, I think. Why? Got no idea. And also some of the local authorities will only have it for massage where people are taking off their clothes, quite rightly. I think it should still be there. Reflexology, people don't take their clothes off, they take their socks off. You're not coming into contact with any bodily fluids, you're not even coming close to their face, you're not coming into their personal space. It's very invasive. So some local authorities have said, not even going to put that on the list, apart from Essex, apart from Hertfordshire. So we have that piece of legislation as well. that is there, that is a legal requirement for you to be licensed. And the premises is licensed and the therapist is licensed. If you're working mobile, it doesn't apply because it's only about the premises. Okay. So we've got that legislation. We've also then got all of the health and safety. So the Health and Safety at Work Act, Fire Protection, Electricity at Work Act, First Aid, doing a risk assessment, all of that is a legal requirement for you as a practitioner. So you can understand why a lot of people say we don't need licensing. It's not necessary. There's plenty of stuff out there for you to comply with to be a professional without the need to have licensing. So there you go. That's the kind of the essence of what you need to know and understand. So taking yourself off and looking at the websites that I've put in the TLR, reading the documentations, looking at the professional associations, hopefully will give you that type of understanding in its basic form that you can then regurgitate. And there is a really great app that is in, I think I've put it in the Facebook 301 Facebook group. It's called otter.ai. And this is an app on your phone that is free that you can turn on and just chat away. Talk to yourself, talk to the cat, talk to a colleague, talk to a friend, get the friend to ask you questions. You can then save it and send it to yourself. And then you've got all the words that you spoke down on paper. And then you can move them around, check the spelling, make it make sense, take out all the ers and the ums that we have when we talk. And you've got the basis of what we've spoken about. So I often say with people that have got a blank paper syndrome, actually just talk into your app about your thoughts and your ideas, and then listen to them back and see whether they make sense, and it will spark off some ideas. You could start with a flowchart or a spider diagram and just put lots of words down on a piece of paper and then connect the dots, and that will help to build the story. You could create little fact sheets. So a fact sheet about why things aren't licensed, what support is there. So kind of break them down into bite-sized bits of information and then pull them together. I don't mind how you present the information, but I want you to prove to me you know some of what I've just talked about, that you have a working knowledge of everything I've just spoken about.
Right.
So then moving on to going back to what we were saying about the individual therapies, part of the requirements as a professional is to signpost. So we don't diagnose, we don't tell the client that they've got something wrong with their heart, therefore they should go and, you know, have their blood pressure taken or what have you. We signpost to other therapists that might help with breathing. So if you notice that your client's got really shallow breathing, they're kind of going, or they're just breathing very slowly, and you can't see their belly rising and falling, then you might talk to them about deep breathing exercises. Breathing exercises is one of the most powerful things to move lymph around our bodies, because lymph doesn't move on its own. It needs us to move. So it needs breathing. It needs constriction of muscles. So you need to walk. So people that are a little bit immobile won't be doing a lot of walking. Therefore, their lymphatic is getting slower, and therefore it's getting sluggish, and therefore it's not cleansing the interstitial fluid that comes from the blood in and out. So all of these things are all interlinked. So breathing techniques might be something that you might want to signpost the client to. So breath work isn't actually on the list, so this isn't a very good example, but I'm just using it because it's a thing. So you might, in your, if you'd chosen breath work, you might say, what is breath work? You would then link it to the lymphatic system. So this is how it works. The reason that we do breath work is twofold. Firstly, because it has a really good effect on the interchange of fluid throughout the body. Secondly, it actually helps to stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic nervous system is what calms us and relaxes us and allows everything to relax and to go a bit fluid. So you don't want your parasympathetic nervous system activated when you are running away from a tiger. That wouldn't be very helpful if you're just sort of like, I just need to go for a wee before I run away from this tiger. And I was like, oh, and I need to yawn a bit before I go run away from the tiger. You want the sympathetic nervous system of the fight and the flight being there. You want your pupils, dilated so you can get the light in so you can see clearly. That's why your eyes go out like this. You want to have your adrenaline pumping. You want your heart rate to get up. You want your bladder to stop working because you do not want to be having to stop for a pee when you're running away. All of those things. So people that live constantly in this fight and flight condition won't find that their parasympathetic nervous system is very active, and it's the parasympathetic nervous system that allows our body to heal. It's the restorative system. It allows all those good things to happen to our body. So we want to have that, and breathing will help our body do that. So take it into a very basic form. If somebody's upset, what do? So they've just had some bad news. They're crying maybe. They're a bit emotional. They're short breathing, so they go, what would you say to them? Breathe, relax. You might stroke their arm. You might do it naturally, mightn't you? Yeah? This is a technique that stimulates parasympathetic nervous system. Yeah. So you do it anyway, don't you? You know all of this stuff because it has fancy words like parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system and adrenals and cortisol and everything. It's a bit like, ooh, but actually, you know that breathing slower and deeper is effective. So in your spiel about breath work, you might put a little bit about breathing is good for this, that, and the other, and we do it naturally. We're trying to calm our breath. If people are starting to hyperventilate, they might breathe into a bag, and it's all about, deep. You might know that there is a technique where people breathe in for 4, out for 4, in for 4, out for 4, and they visualize going around in a square. If you've had any experiences with trauma, to bring in any work that you've done before that you know. You might then talk about where the technique came from. You might talk about a book that you have come across that talks about breath work coming from, have you heard of Wim Hof? The Wim Hof technique is about the interchange of hot and cold in the body and breath work as well. So you might say this all originated from this guy who was Scandinavian and rolled around in the ice, and they did some experiments and found that. So you might bring in some history of where did it come from? How has it been adapted for people in this country? We don't have snow outside to roll around in. So therefore, in this country, the protocols are to have ice cold showers. And you start with 5 seconds and you build up this regime to have really cold showers for minutes at a time, and you control your breathing through having ice, because if you have ice cold water on you, what's the first thing you do? You breathe in sharply, don't you? So the idea is that you learn not to do that, and you breathe in and you breathe out. Has anybody had bikini waxing? Okay, one of the techniques that we teach in bikini waxing is that the client breathes in, and as you remove the strip, the client breathes out. So you're not suddenly going because it's a bit uncomfortable. So you might talk about where this came from, what was the origins, the fact that somebody's going to get, if you're talking about the ice technique with it, it involves getting wet. Now, I know that that sounds really ridiculous, but I have had people that have done this assignment about acupuncture, and not once have they mentioned the word needle. Now, if you are recommending acupuncture to a client, do you think that telling them it's a needle in the skin is actually quite important for them to understand the concept? It is, isn't it? Yeah. So massage, it's important that you explain that you've got no clothes on when you are being massaged, traditionally with Swedish massage. However, Indian head massage, that is not specifically on that list because it's not specifically a thing, but it's a form of massage. Indian head massage can be done fully clothed, without any oils, seated in a chair. So that is a different form of massage. So if you're talking about massage, you could bring in all the different nuances. Massage comes from India. It comes from China. It comes from Europe. So there are different influences. The one that came from Europe, which is the one that we have in most of our spas and salons, is all around the physiotherapy type massage, which is all about compression and manipulation of tissues. But equally, Thai massage is all about bending and stretching. And if anybody's been to Thailand and had a massage, it's incredibly forceful and pulling your limbs about and in all sorts of different directions. It's a completely different form of treatment, but it still comes under the headache of body work and massage because it still has an effect on joints and tendons and ligaments, which is what massage does. So if you were recommending treatment to a client and you were recommending massage, but you were talking to the client saying, well, you know, most of the time you would be expected to take your clothes off, and they said, oh, I couldn't do that, I couldn't bear somebody touching me, you would then follow that up with, well, maybe you might want to try Thai massage, because Thai massage is done over clothes on the floor. So it's a completely different concept. So it's just having a little bit of information about the topic, but keep in your mind the whole time, it's about you being able to refer your clients appropriately to other practitioners. So then one of the questions a client might ask you is it expensive? So your research might look at some local practitioners and say, well, I couldn't find a Thai therapist massage in this area. The nearest one I could find was wherever, if that's what you were doing. Or you might say, this particular discipline is governed. So to say, if you're doing chiropractic, for instance, chiropractic, you actually have to have a license and you have to be on this authority list. Whereas if you were recommending somebody went for yoga, anybody can teach yoga. There's no requirements whatsoever other than your health and safety and your public liability. But other than that, the depth and breadth of knowledge that somebody has got with yoga, I wouldn't know the difference between different types of yogas. And if somebody, I mean, I really dislike yoga, but there is one form of yoga which I really, really like because it's more fluid, it's flowing, you don't hold the poses for very long. Everything is moving in and out. It does a lot of breath work. It does a lot of energy work. I love that yoga. So there's lots of different types of yoga. So it might be that if you are recommending to your client yoga, let's just take that as an opportunity. And the client said, oh, I really don't like yoga. Well, what type of yoga have you tried? Oh, well, it's, you know, I stood in a pose and I had to do this. Oh, it really hurt my back, or it gave me, you know, or it made me feel unsteady, or I didn't have the balance for it. If you've done your research on yoga, you might say, well, actually, there's lots of different types of yogas. There's something called Strala, there's Vinyasa, there's hot yoga, there's this, there's that, there's the other. Maybe you might want to try Vinyasa yoga, which is a different type. It comes from a different part of Asia and, you know, it's got different influences. So if you chose yoga, that's what maybe you would put into that. Does that make sense? Yeah. So how much does it cost? What does it actually do? Where's it come from? Are there any variances in it? So has it been changed? So a lot of the techniques that we now have in this country with lots of different types of complementary therapies, they've all been adulterated for the Western. If you go and have reflexology in China, you are going to get a very, very different reflexology treatment than if you have in the West. Because with reflexology, there are lots of influences and it's been changed. So when you do the research on reflexology, there's Eunice Ingham, I should be able to pronounce that. There's lots of them, I can't remember them all. But they all have a different stance of how they came to be, and they've all been changed. Has anybody done Reiki? Yeah, so with Reiki, there are different lineages, aren't there? So with a lot of these complementary therapies, there are different families, and they've all, it's a bit like cultures. We all have slightly different cultures. Even within one culture, we have different classes. We have different ways of doing things, and you will hear somebody say, oh well, I'm from up north, so this is how we do this. We would never have Yorkshire pudding with our meat, we always have it before, type of thing. Everybody has a different way of doing it, and it comes through a different lineage, and complementary therapies are no different, really. I want you to liken complementary therapists to Yorkshire pudding, but And so I go back to your assignment is you showing me that you've got that knowledge and understanding, not writing me a dissertation about it. So I'm not sure whether, Danielle, that's answered your question as to how much you've already put in there and whether you've covered enough or too much, whether you've missed bits out. You may want to go back and look at it in the light of what I've just said. And then the last bit of it is all about, because as complementary therapists, we do need to communicate with our clients effectively, and we need to know what would be a good communication technique and what would be one that would actually maybe create a barrier, and how to recognize barriers. So if a client has no eye contact with you, is folding their arms, is maybe twitching, whatever, that to me would show me that the client is really uncomfortable, that they're feeling threatened, they're feeling uncomfortable. Maybe I've asked them a question that they're feeling threatened by. Maybe I'm expecting them to do something. Maybe I've just shoved a questionnaire and a pen in their hand, and they actually can't read or write. That's a barrier to communication. Maybe I'm standing over them. They're sitting and I'm standing. That's again a barrier to communication. It makes people feel uncomfortable. So use your experience of what you think is a good way of communicating with people. Use your experience of when you've had good and bad communication, when communication has broken down, when you've ended up in the wrong place, when you've not done something that you should have done because you haven't read something and you haven't read it because it wasn't clear, or you had really good experience because actually somebody made that extra phone call or that extra text message just to remind you. Now doctors and hairdressers and all sorts of things, you're told maybe 15 different times to confirm your appointment for this, that and the other. That's their way of hopefully having good communication with you. We do a lot of our consultations by phoning the client up beforehand and having a conversation with them. A lot of places have Zoom calls with their clients and actually introduce themselves so that you can actually see the face. I love doing a Zoom call because sometimes the first time that I would have met you would be in the classroom, and so I try and do a lot of building. So we'll have a text messages, we'll then have a call, and then maybe I'll meet you at the school, and then we'll have a Zoom call. So by the time you get to start with us, hopefully you feel like you kind of we know us. There is that kind of that know, and hopefully the trust as well. And so that's our way of trying to build the good communication. We don't always get it right, of course, but you know, we try. So you need to be able to recognize all of those things as well. Using terminology can be a barrier. Accents can be a barrier. My dad is I don't know quite the right word, but anybody who's got not foreign accent, not sort of any different country, but Welsh and Scottish and Irish, he has a real problem. He can't understand them. So we call him, I can't remember what we call him now, but he really does has a problem understanding. It's a hearing problem that he has of people with accents. But you know, sometimes if somebody's got a very strong estrial accent, they might say a word that you can't work out what they're actually meaning. So how can you overcome that? What can you do to support that? Can you have written form? Could you have text form? Could you have notices? Could you, could you talk to the client and ask them to repeat back? So can I just check that what your understanding of what we've just said? So in some circumstances, not every circumstances, but sometimes that is a technique that people use when you're giving instructions. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to go to the school.
That's fine. I've gone way over what I said I was going to do, haven't I?
Thank you very much.
So yeah.
So when can I expect your first piece of work in, or your second piece?
I'm going to get straight on it. Wednesday, I will start having a look.
Okay. All right then. Great.
Thank you.
Okay. Nice to see you.
Thank you.
Any other question?
No, all good. Thank you.
Okay. So my last piece of advice is do the work and do the learning, immerse yourself, just do all of that research and get to know what's going on, and then do the assignment. Don't do the piece of work and then think you've got to do the assignment, because then what you'll be doing is you'll be trying to learn to do the assignment. And that's like learning the answers to an exam. That doesn't give you good learning. So I would rather that you didn't do the assignments, but you'd gone all the way through the course, you were in the Facebook groups, you were asking the questions, you'd subscribe to some newsletters and just get stuff in your life.
Get newsletters.
Yeah, get stuff in your life and ask the questions. Okay.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Very helpful. See you soon.